The resident singer in the bar turned out to be the teenager I had a crush on in college. At first, I was a little confused and uncertain, until my best friend, Coral Sydney, bumped my arm. "Paula Lou, isn't that Gustavi Panzi? It's at the university where so many people like him, and he drags himself like a 205-year-old Gustavi Panzi." I followed Coral Sydney's gaze, and the boy was sitting on a bar stool with his guitar in his arms, and the light was not too bright on the boy's body, which seemed to coincide with what he had been when he was younger. It was the first day of my college coverage. I pulled my suitcase and listened to my senior sister introduce the school. A wheel rolled in front of me. I subconsciously squatted down to pick it up, and when I looked up to find the owner of the wheel, I saw Gustavi Panzi standing in the middle of a bunch of men, with a guitar on his back. The sun shone on Gustavi Panzi, and that was the first time I knew what a glance was. Gustavi Panzi smiled at his friends next to him, his index and middle fingers together, swung them out of his forehead, and ran towards me. The wind lifted the corners of Gustavi Panzi's coat, and took the wheel from my hand, his voice faint, like the end of a cello. "Thank you." Little did I know at the time that this would be the only intersection between me and Gustavi Panzi. I shook my head and shook off the memories in my head, and looked up at Gustavi Panzi in the light, and a little bitterness came to my mouth. Coral Sydney next to me bumped my arm. There were a lot of people who liked Gustavi Panzi at the time, and I liked Gustavi Panzi too, but I'm afraid you're the only nerd who didn't like Gustavi Panzi. Coral Sydney pulled out 3 red tickets from his bag with a look on his face. Coral Sydney and I grew up together, and I knew what the hell Coral Sydney had in mind, so I hurriedly reached out to grab Coral Sydney. Who knew that Coral Sydney was as nimble as a loach? Coral Sydney walked up to Gustavi Panzi, and I didn't know what he was whispering, but when I saw Gustavi Panzi looking this way, I quickly stretched out my hand and combed my hair. My hand unconsciously clenched into a fist, looking for the best arc of my smile over and over again. A few minutes later, Coral Sydney walked over with Gustavi Panzi. I tried to calm myself down a bit, and I raised my eyes to meet Gustavi Panzi, who curled the corners of her lips and spoke with some familiarity. "Paula Lou." My pupils dilated, and even Coral Sydney's eyes widened, and he looked at Gustavi Panzi in surprise. Gustavi Panzi laughed awkwardly, realizing that something wasn't quite right with the sentence, and his tone was a little flirtatious, and he didn't hesitate. "Rachel Hicks liked you in college." Rachel Hicks and Gustavi Panzi share the same dormitory, so it's no surprise to know that. My excitement fell instantly. How could Gustavi Panzi pay attention to me? I was just the person his brother liked. Gustavi Panzi pulled out the 3 red tickets, and shoved them back into Coral Sydney's hand. "They're old classmates. What do you want to hear?" Coral Sydney blurted out. "Confession Balloon." The Confession Balloon is a song sung by Gustavi Panzi at the school celebration that year, which can be described as a god, and I heard that Gustavi Panzi was to confess to the school flower at that time. Gustavi Panzi sat in front of me with his guitar in his arms, plucking the strings as gently as he did back then, humming a love song in my voice. I looked at Gustavi Panzi in distraction. It was May when the cicadas were chirping, and I had just entered my first year of college. Coral Sydney snatched my notebook from my hand. Thinking of the contents of the notebook, I immediately reached out to grab it. Coral Sydney immediately hid his hand behind his back. "My little nerd, the school celebration is about to start. You can really sit down if the stools next to you are all gone." Coral Sydney seemed to know what was going on in my heart, and snatched my stool directly. "Paula Lou, let me tell you, the counselor gave me a death order, and no one should be missing." I followed Coral Sydney to the playground, which was actually quite at the front of the class, but unfortunately we arrived too late. Coral Sydney grabbed my hand, and moved my stool to the last row of the previous class. Coincidentally, that class was Gustavi Panzi's class. I looked at the 5 empty stools next to me, and grabbed Coral Sydney's hand. Coral Sydney is not good about this. Coral Sydney sat down. Very familiar. "Brothers." A few minutes later, I saw Gustavi Panzi with a guitar on his back. For the sake of the performance on stage, Gustavi Panzi wore light makeup on her face, a rather youthful white shirt, and her school uniform was casually draped over her shoulders. Gustavi Panzi is one of those people who don't obey in school and don't cut their hair. and make the dean jump to his feet. Gustavi Panzi's hair was grabbed by Gustavi Panzi, and his eyes fell on my and Coral Sydney's faces, his face full of confusion, and his deep brow furrowed. That is, until a group of boys walked up to Gustavi Panzi and hooked Gustavi Panzi on the shoulder. What's going on with Gustavi Panzi? I was dumbfounded when I looked at the beautiful woman. Gustavi Panzi bumped the boy's arm. Damn it, it's not our class, Coral Sydney explained. And with that, Gustavi Panzi sat down next to me. You can smell a faint woody scent between your noses. When I was stunned, Gustavi Panzi came up to me and threw myself on the stool. My face flushed. At this time, the distance was so close that I could even see the fine fluff on Gustavi Panzi's face clearly, and I couldn't help but look down and fall on Gustavi Panzi's lips, which should have been smeared with lipstick, and it looked very close. Aware of what I was thinking, my ears were even more red, only to find out that the person Gustavi Panzi was looking at was not me, but the schoolgirl of the next class, and the heart that was originally mentioned was completely down. Gustavi Panzi's voice was very sincere, not as stingy as before, with a bit of gentleness. It's coming to me soon. Remember to listen carefully. With that, Gustavi Panzi smiled politely at me, picked up his guitar and prepared to go on stage. I froze for 2 seconds, my mind still stuck on the image of Gustavi Panzi smiling at me. It was Coral Sydney who tugged at it before he reacted. His eyes fell on the stage, and Gustavi Panzi held his guitar and tuned his pitch, as if he didn't know how bewitching his voice was. The microphone was pressed to his lips, his starry eyes were full of affection, and his voice was low and hoarse. Welcome to my concert, caused the girls in the audience to scream one after another. At that moment, I actually looked at Gustavi Panzi, and hurriedly lowered my head, remembering Gustavi Panzi's smile. Coral Sydney tugged at my arm. Paula Lou, why are you wandering again? You love to wander as much as you did when you were a child. I quickly raised my eyes to Gustavi Panzi, who had finished playing. It turns out that no matter what time, the confession balloon will not belong to me. Coral Sydney grabbed my phone and handed it to Gustavi Panzi. Old alumnus Ada Weshit. I looked at Coral Sydney with a shocked look on my face, and saw that Gustavi Panzi had already opened Weshit and scanned my QR code. Coral Sydney winked at me. Gustavi Panzi was taken away by the foreman's men, probably because he was a resident singer after all. I'm not too embarrassed to stay here any longer. Pull Coral Sydney away. As soon as I came out of the bar, I looked at Coral Sydney with an interrogating look. It's okay to add him to something. Coral Sydney took my phone and let my friend through, and pushed Gustavi Panzi's Weshit account to herself. Anyway, Gustavi Panzi is also someone I've had a crush on for 2 or 3 years, so it's hard to get up. I'm just embarrassed to add it directly. Paula Lou, I'm wrong. I'll buy you a bag. I pulled back my phone and looked at the simple and clear words, Gustavi Panzi, in the chat box. As a courtesy, I replied. Paula Lou, eyes fall on Gustavi Panzi's avatar, which is a Q version of Clankbell. Looks like Gustavi Panzi likes Jingle Cats. Wait for the Jingle Cat. I seem to have thought of something. Click on the grade group, and find the school flower. Sure enough, the nickname is Tinker Bell. The joy of reunion after a long absence has all vanished at this moment, and it turns out that not only I have not forgotten the person I liked when I was young, but also Gustavi Panzi. My chat with Gustavi Panzi didn't do anything but give each other names. I didn't take the initiative to get in touch, and I've been too busy lately. It wasn't until I saw the client's profile this time. To be precise, it should be Lydia Spencer, the project manager, who connected with me. Lydia Spencer is the name of the school flower, and I wasn't sure if this person was the one I knew until I saw the photo. Even after 5 or 6 years, Lydia Spencer is still beautiful and eye-catching, standing out from the crowd. It was clear that during the docking, Lydia Spencer recognized me as well. Have we met somewhere? I'm your college alumnus, and my name is Paula Lou. Lydia Spencer reacted immediately, her expression visibly agitated. I know you. I didn't think much of it. I just thought that Lydia Spencer knew me through Gustavi Panzi's roommate, Rachel Hicks, and didn't pay much attention to it, until, when the contract was signed and I was about to leave, Lydia Spencer grabbed my hand. It's not too early for old classmates. Let's get together. I couldn't shirk it. so I had to follow. Lydia Spencer filled herself with a glass of white wine, and looked at me with an envious expression. Paula Lou, you are luckier than me. Those men are all dogs. When chasing you, I can't wait to pluck all the stars in the sky for you. After chasing you, I will reveal my true nature. Paula Lou, you promise me not to get close to men. It will become unfortunate. Lydia Spencer succeeded in getting herself drunk, glass after glass. I looked at the drunk and unconscious Lydia Spencer, and had a headache. I can think of a relationship with Lydia Spencer as Gustavi Panzi, plus what Lydia Spencer just said. I couldn't help it, so I dialed Gustavi Panzi's Weshit number. The phone was answered, and some loud music could be clearly heard. And after a few seconds, the music died down, and it was Gustavi Panzi, who had walked out of the bar. Paula Lou. Gustavi Panzi's voice is a little hoarse, and whenever I listen to it, I get excited. But for now, I remember Lydia Spencer. Gustavi Panzi, Lydia Spencer is drunk. Could I please trouble you to come over? My voice trembled a little in the back. Even if I haven't seen it for many years, when we meet again, I will be moved. But unfortunately the person in front of me is no longer alone. Why should I be deeply involved? Where are you? I gave the name of the bar to Gustavi Panzi, and fearing that Gustavi Panzi wouldn't find it, sat at the door and waited for Gustavi with Lydia Spencer on board Panzi. Right now, it's dark again, and a few drunken men have come out of nowhere. I put my arms around Lydia Spencer nervously, my hands touching the heels on my feet, and if they dared to come closer, I would smash them into the heads, smashing them into holes. The men slowly walked towards us, and I nervously clenched my heels. We heard a throttle bang, and Gustavi Panzi stopped in front of us with a nice tail flick, separating us from the group of drunken men. I'm coming. It's just 3 words, but it gives me a great sense of security, and I feel a little warm in my heart. Looking at Gustavi Panzi's outstretched hand, I realized that it wasn't meant for me. Lydia Spencer fell into Gustavi Panzi's arms. Because she was not very comfortable, she opened her eyes, looked at the man in front of her, and looked disgusted. Gustavi Panzi, you are really haunted, and the university has ruined a lot of Miss Ben's peach blossom. Because of you, Lydia Spencer spoke, her voice getting quieter and quieter, and she passed out completely. I listened to Lydia Spencer and looked at Gustavi Panzi, whose face was completely blackened, and it turned out that I was just a supporting character in the scene of the reunion. He pulled out a smile and said in a calm voice, Gustavi Panzi, please send Lydia Spencer home safely. Gustavi Panzi looked up at me. There was a bit of emotion in his eyes that I couldn't see, and his voice was visibly restrained. What about you? I shook my phone. I took a taxi. Taxis are just a fade, and the area is so remote that few drivers are willing to take orders here. It's just that Gustavi Panzi's locomotive can't fit 3 people. What's more, 3 people are really too crowded. Gustavi Panzi had no intention of leaving, instead sat down on the steps. I'll wait with you. At this time, it was difficult to ride a tiger, and I could only hope to get a ride quickly. But sometimes the more you want something, the more you can't get anything, and even if the price is tripled, no one wants to come. I'm going to find Coral Sydney to pick me up and take me home. The phone was snatched away by Gustavi Panzi before it could be dialed. Gustavi Panzi gestured to a nearby BB. Let's get together for the night. There were 2 rooms in total, one for me and Lydia Spencer. Gustavi Panzi won, sending Lydia Spencer back to the room. My stomach growled. To be honest, I hadn't eaten much just now. How could I possibly eat anything in the face of someone my former crush liked? I went downstairs to buy a few buckets of instant noodles to eat. It's a pity that the boss didn't think that there would be any business in the homestay, and he didn't find a box of instant noodles after rummaging through the entire homestay. The boss pointed to his kitchen. I knew there was no other way, but my cooking skills were really dark cuisine. It shouldn't matter if you cook dumplings, as long as you get the timing right. The boss looked at me with a look of embarrassment and asked again, do you really need my help? I waved my hand and refused, but the boss didn't dare to go far, for fear that I would blow up his kitchen. 10 minutes later, I have to admit that I don't know anything about cooking, and the dumplings are straight to the bottom. Gustavi Panzi leaned against the door, curling the corners of her lips to show her teeth. Are you getting food? I'm a little hungry too. I was startled when I heard the sudden sound, and the pot I was holding in my hand also slipped accidentally, and the hot water fell directly on my hand. It's summer, and I'm wearing short sleeves, and I'm immediately red. I felt a little warm in my palm, and my movements were not very gentle, and I was dragged to the position of the tap water, and let the water hit my arm. It hurts a little. Bear with me. I was so focused on looking at Gustavi Panz's eyebrows that I forgot about the pain in my hands. It wasn't until Gustavi Panz's fingers touched the blisters that came out of my arm that I withdrew my hand in pain. I'm sorry I hurt you. Gustavi Panzi looked even more anxious than I was. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I was careless. The boss outside the kitchen looked at us with an expression that I could understand. And when he took the burn medicine, he stuffed something into his hand. Gustavi Panzi just glanced at it and rushed to return it to the boss, who ran faster than a rabbit. Gustavi Panzi had no choice but to stuff things into his pants bag, but his ears were a little too red. I didn't want Gustavi Panzi to be swayed by my injury, so I joked with Gustavi Panzi like Coral Sydney. The boss didn't give you a dynamite bag. Gustavi Panzi didn't laugh, and was even more silent. In the face of people you like, you will probably be a little more sensitive. I smiled wryly. Don't take that to heart. I don't tell jokes very well. Gustavi Panzi looked up at me, the starry eyes. I think it's funny. I knew it was comforting, but I couldn't help but bend my eyebrows, and I was still smiling when I returned to the room with my bandaged hand. When he woke up the next morning, Gustavi Panzi was gone. The boss jokingly said to me, "Little girl, your boyfriend has left beforehand, and he has made you breakfast, and put it on the table. By the way, did you use that thing yesterday?" Yesterday. I thought the boss was talking about burn medicine, and I looked at my hand that didn't hurt much. I used it. It's pretty easy to use. Boss, where did you buy it? I'll also prepare some. The boss stared at me, stunned for a few seconds, then took out his phone, clicked it a few times, and handed it to me. I looked at the screen and my face turned red. I seemed to know what the boss gave Gustavi Panzi yesterday. When I returned the phone to my boss, I stuttered a little. Thank you, boss." Something weighed on my shoulders, and I thought that someone had discovered the stupidity just now, and the alarm bell rang in my heart. Glancing nervously, I was relieved to see Lydia Spencer's gorgeous face. Lydia Spencer took a sharp breath. "It smells so good." He ran into the kitchen and quickly came out with a bowl of noodles. "Paula Lou, is this mine?" I think of the boss of the square, which Gustavi Panzi made for his girlfriend, and Lydia Spencer is the only one who fits his girlfriend in front of her. I nodded. Lydia Spencer ate it unceremoniously, commenting as she ate, "This thing is weird and delicious. I just don't know why this taste is a little familiar, like Gustavi Panzis made." Lydia Spencer put down her chopsticks and looked at me nervously. "Paula Lou, don't tell me this thing was made by Gustavi Panzi." I'm dead. I'm going to say how this smell is so familiar." Lydia Spencer quickly took my hand. "Paula Lou, only you can save me now." I was a little confused. "Why can I save you? I can't say a word or two. Anyway, this bowl of noodles is not made for me. It is made for you, Paula Lou. As long as you bite this bowl of noodles and you eat it, you are my reborn parents." I didn't understand Lydia Spencer's words at all. How could this bowl of noodles be made for Lydia Spencer by Gustavi Panzi, when it was clearly made for Lydia Spencer? "I have nothing to do with Gustavi Panzi." Lydia Spencer didn't dare to say more. As if she was about to flee, I stayed where I was, puzzled. Not long after, Coral Sydney's Big G stopped at the door of the BB. As soon as I got in the car, Coral Sydney shook my hand and said, "Paula Lou, I have a secret to tell you." Coral Sydney pushed her phone right in front of me, and it was the chat interface between her and Gustavi Panzi. "Can Coral Sydney help me receive a verification code? My Weshit account was stolen just now." I frowned, not understanding what Coral Sydney was trying to say. And then, "Don't worry, the ultimate is still to come." Coral Sydney pushed out the grade group chat on Weshit. It's full of screenshots of crazy rises, and they all have one feature. That is, they are all posted by Gustavi Panzi. Coral Sydney took my hand. "The secret is that Gustavi Panzi has been stolen." I was speechless. What a secret. The phone suddenly rang. I'll open it and look at it. Can Ding Dong Cat help me receive a verification code? My Weshit account was stolen just now. I was about to tell Coral Sydney that I received this message as well. After a few seconds, I came back to my senses, and my eyes fell on the screen of my phone again. Jingle Cat is me. How can Jingle Cat be me? Coral Sydney naturally noticed that I took out my phone and took it back, and leaned over to take a look. How did Gustavi Pansy know you could only draw jingle bells? Those memories that had been sealed in the dust awakened again. Coral Sydney is the class leader, and my friend as the class leader is a brick that needs to be moved. Some unclaimed troubles have come to Coral Sydney's hands, such as the creative contest required by the school, painting manhole covers, saying that it is a competition, but in fact, it is to beautify the school. As Coral Sydney's little hair and best friend, I bore the brunt of the appointment and was appointed 5 manhole covers. As a person who has studied art, the best thing I can draw is a jingle cat. Draw directly with a few strokes. The 5 manhole covers are all kinds of jingle cats, but few people know that I painted the jingle cat. Coral Sydney also held his chin. How would Gustavi Pansy know? Then Coral Sydney pressed my shoulder. Gustavi Pansy wouldn't have had a crush on you when she was in college. Coincidentally, Coral Sydney and I both remembered Gustavi Pansy's roommate, Rachel Hicks. Coral Sydney said with a slight teasing, I didn't expect that Rachel Hicks to be the person who knows you best, but me. Coral Sydney sent me home, and as soon as I kicked my heels out, my phone rang. It's an unfamiliar number. I don't usually answer unfamiliar numbers, and as soon as I hung up, the call came again. I picked it up. Hello, are you Gustavi Pansy's girlfriend? Gustavi Pansy was in a car accident. Can you come to the hospital? Right now. I don't care that there are too many words in this discourse that I don't understand, such as Gustavi Pansy's girlfriend, such as where Gustavi Pansy came from, my mobile phone number, and I just asked where I was and went out. When I arrived at the hospital by taxi, I found that I had forgotten to put on my shoes, and the pain in my heart came out. Following the nurse's words, I found the emergency room with the lights on. The nurse came over and handed me the broken phone. This is your husband's mobile phone. Because it has a password, you can only contact the emergency contact. Please pay the fee here. By the time I ran up with everything done, the operation was over. The nurse handed me a pair of slippers. The little couple quarreled. The head of the bed quarreled, and the end of the bed. If passers-by didn't find out in time this time, the consequences would be unimaginable. I nodded at the nurse and looked at Gustavi Pansy on the hospital bed, her head covered in white gauze, and her eyes turned even redder, sitting on the edge of Gustavi Pansy's bedside. I don't know how long it took to fall asleep in a daze. It was already dawn when I woke up, and Gustavi Pansy woke up too, staring at me. Sorry to bother you yesterday. It's fine. I rubbed my aching shoulders and rang the bell. Gustavi Pansy noticed my gaze and touched his bandaged head, his face full of disgust. Am I ugly like this? I shook my head. Not ugly. How can it be ugly? No matter what Gustavi Pansy looks like, I seem to love him. The nurse came in, confirmed something, and spoke to Gustavi Pansy. Your girlfriend is so interested in you, that she ran out without wearing shoes. Gustavi Pansy immediately looked at my feet, and I quickly hid them behind my back. I'm fine. Glancing at the nurse again. You misunderstood. We're not boyfriend and girlfriend. The nurse looked at me in disbelief. How could it be? Not yet. Gustavi Pansy nodded in reply, then looked at the nurse. Is there iodine volt? Don't bother. I'm fine. Gustavi Pansy stared at me, as if he was going to eat someone, and my voice grew quieter. Maybe I still hope that Gustavi Pansy will care more about me. Gustavi Pansy took the iodophor from the nurse. Paula Lou, you're because I'm hurt. Do you want me to blame myself? Be obedient. Give me my feet. I shook my head and reached out to take the iodophor from Gustavi Pansy's hand. I'll just do it myself. As I turned my back to Gustavi Pansy and looked at the bloody soles of my feet, I felt the belated pain that made me cry. I heard a fiery voice outside the door. Gustavi Pansy, are you going to rush to reincarnation? Ride so fast. There are ghosts chasing you behind you. I've been cleaning up your mess since college. Can't you let me save some snacks? Men really don't have a good thing. Lydia Spencer's voice was a little quieter. Paula lose too. I turned my head and nodded politely to Lydia Spencer, thinking to myself that I shouldn't be here at this time. They were a little couple. What am I doing here? When he was about to get up, his hand was grabbed by Gustavi Panzi, although it was his wrist, but the palm of his hand was hot, and it was still impossible to ignore. You've got a foot injury. Where are you going? Lydia Spencer looked at me nervously, and for a moment I just felt ashamed. It was I who stole the limelight from Lydia Spencer. There's something going on with that company. I'll go first. I could feel the tears rolling in my eyes, and they would fall in the blink of an eye. Thankfully, Gustavi Panzi didn't stop me again. I almost escaped from the hospital. Listening to the phone that rang suddenly, I subconsciously wanted to hang up, and waited until I saw the contact on it clearly before picking it up. I am a counselor at the university, and this year the counselor wants me to come back to the school to speak to the students as a distinguished alumnus. I didn't refuse. That university will always live in my memory. It is dazzling enough for me to remember it for all the rest of my life. The phone rang again, and it was a message from Gustavi Panzi. Paula Lu, my number has been retrieved. I'm sorry for you today. I'll treat you to dinner another day. I didn't ask Gustavi Panzi why my note was Jingle Bell, just calmly replied with a good word. In the next few days, Gustavi Panzi didn't contact me, and I was busy, preparing for the school anniversary. It's like before I met Gustavi Panzi, as if I was alone. It's time for the school anniversary. The counselor waited for me at the school gate, looked around, and then spoke. Paula Lu, you're alone. No one is coming with you. Back then a few of our counselors made a bet to see if you could be together in the end, and now it seems that I lost that bet. I frowned, unable to understand what the counselor was saying. What was alone? What was together? I've always been alone. The number of exchange students back then was still. The counselor realized something, and immediately ended this paragraph, with a little anxiety on her face. Paula Lu, I still have some business. You go in first. I was about to ask something, and the counselor was gone. The exchange student was in my senior year, and there was an opportunity to go abroad for an exchange. And at that time there was only one person in each department. It's just that Gustavi Panzi didn't come for that exam, so the exchange student fell on me. In my heart, I also regret that this is the only time I have been able to stay in the same classroom as Gustavi Panzi, and the distance between them is only 1 meter. Now it seems that there was something else going on back then. Fortunately, when the school celebration began, I didn't have to think much about it, took the speech and went to the stage, looking at the crowd in the dark. This was the first time I felt good eyesight, and I saw Gustavi Panzi sitting in the crowd at a glance. Gustavi Panzi smiled at me and nodded slightly. At that moment, I seemed to see Gustavi Panzi singing the confession balloon on stage, and looked at Lydia Spencer with the same eyes that passed through the sea of people. By the time I finished reading the manuscript, Gustavi Panzi was gone. I thought everything was my delusion. Eyes fell on the corridor of light and shadow. Gustavi Panzi and the counselor stood together. I don't know what the two said. The counselor had a lot of smiles on his face. I've always known that Gustavi Panzi had the ability to eat both men and women. The counselor noticed me, beckoned me over, and asked me to stand with Gustavi Panzi, and the counselor regretted. What a good woman. I quickly waved my hand. You misunderstood. He pointed to Lydia Spencer, who had also come out of the debriefing room. That's it. How could I be a couple with Gustavi Panzi? I'm his own cousin. And even if I weren't, I wouldn't look down on this thing. Lydia Spencer's voice was unhurried. The counselor nodded approvingly. I'll just say, how could I be wrong? Our counselor's office was very optimistic about the two of you. I felt like I was petrified, and I could only repeat the words of the old class. Back then, so the counselor said that the person who should be with me was Gustavi Panzi. Lydia Spencer bumped my arm. Yes, my brother only dared to secretly like you when he was killed. Didn't you get involved in a punishment back then? I have never seen my brother so humble. I remember that I almost lost my qualification as an exchange student because of this incident. Even if I had to do it all over again, I would still choose the same thing as I did back then. I can't just watch Coral Sydney being scammed and be indifferent. Coral Sydney is such a good person, who gave everything for love. and finally became the talk of other people's mouths, and became the object of wanton dissemination of photos. I countered by exposing the boy's ambiguous chat with other girls, as well as remarks about Coral Sydney's various PUAs, including various photos of the boy. It is the best choice to treat others in the way of others. But unfortunately the impact of the year was very bad. It turned out that the disappearance was due to Gustavi Panzi. I looked at Gustavi Panzi, who had red ears and a shy face, which was not the same as the Gustavi Panzi I knew. The counselor sensibly does not meddle in matters between us. However, Lydia Spencer finally found an opportunity. Sister-in-law, let me tell you, my brother originally wanted to confess to you after the exam. Who would have thought that those things would happen? He didn't take the exam. I know that Gustavi Panzi didn't take the test, and I used a trumpet to ask Gustavi Panzi why he didn't take the test. But the news is as bad as the previous blessings. I thought of a lot of things, and I asked around, but in the end I didn't know why Gustavi Panzi didn't go to the exam. Gustavi Panzi just said lightly, "Shame on you, Lydia Spencer. You want to die." Paula Lou, I said I was going to eat last time. Will you be okay today? In the restaurant, because I went late. The location of the private room is gone. The three of us sat down the hall as Gustavi Panzi pushed the menu in front of me and I symbolically ordered a pickled pepper bunny. Lydia Spencer was surprised. Dude, this is your favorite dish. I smiled awkwardly. This dish was indeed Gustavi Panzi's favorite at first. I'm not a big spicy eater, so I want to get a little closer to Gustavi Panzi. Every day after class, I go to a small restaurant outside the school with a group of Gustavi Panzi, and eat the spicy pickled pepper rabbit. Looking across the table, Gustavi Panzi's group of people bragged about cowides. Later, I gradually became able to eat spicy food, and this dish became an indispensable dish for me at dinner. Gustavi Panzi looked at me twice, then turned to Lydia Spencer. You're talkative. Lydia Spencer pouted helplessly. No one expected that the owner of this store would be the owner of the pickled pepper rabbit at the school gate back then. The boss stared at me, looked carefully, and clapped his hands excitedly. You're the girl who was going to be perverted back then. Turned his head to look at Gustavi Panzi, even more excited. Back then, there were only two people in the store who loved to be perverted and spicy, and now you are together. Great, I have a treat today. I was about to explain something when Gustavi Panzi smiled at the boss. You have a good memory. The boss smiled and nodded. That's for sure. One is really spicy, and the other is so spicy that it cries every time. But every time you have to order perverted spicy, you can't remember it after a long time. I lowered my head in embarrassment. The last person the boss said was me. I was so stupid back then. I thought that this way I would have a connection with the person I liked. Lydia Spencer looked at me gossipily. Sister-in-law, you wouldn't like my brother back then, would you? I could feel more than one gaze coming to me, and I knew that now was not the time to tell the truth. There were a lot of people who liked Gustavi Panzi back then, but admitting that I don't like Gustavi Panzi is still a bit difficult. I like him. It's a secret that I can't talk about. Lydia Spencer looked at Gustavi Panzi with a look of pity. Gustavi Panzi, it seems that you can't do it. But the charm is still not good. Gustavi Panzi ignored Lydia Spencer, and looked at the pickled pepper rabbit on the table. Gustavi Panzi and I spoke at the same time. Boss, ask for a dough. Obviously, with the air conditioner on, the room is not too hot, and I always feel slimy. At the end of the meal, Lydia Spencer got drunk again, and kept muttering, Rachel Hicks, that bastard, if she ignores me again, she will break up. And from college to now, my mother is really tired. My ears were very good at this time, and Gustavi Panzi clearly said that Rachel Hicks liked me in college, and now it seems that the person Rachel Hicks likes is not me, but Lydia Spencer. Could it be Gustavi Panzi, who liked me back then? Gustavi Panzi thought of this as well, and covered Lydia Spencer's mouth directly. Lydia Spencer, who is drunk, has a lot of strength? Gustavi Panzi took your pig's trotters away from the old lady, and I want to say that you men are a urine. Obviously they don't dare to speak. When Paula Lou accidentally fell down the stairs and was injured, you are a young master, who doesn't touch the spring water with 10 fingers, go to learn to cook noodles, and want to give it to Paula Lou. As a result, Do you really think that I can't give it away because I eat you? It's just cowardice. I obviously said that I was good, and I confessed after graduating from college. But as a result, something happened at home, and after solving the problem, can't you say it? Is your mouth used for decoration? Rachel Hicks. That bastard. Sheet. My mother is going to break up with him. Lydia Spencer cried so hard that Rachel Hicks finally took Lydia Spencer back. At the door of the hotel, Gustavi Pansy and I were standing together. After listening to so much exciting news, I don't know what to say at this moment. Gustavi Pansy has always been the pride of the sky in my mind, and now it's like a student who did something wrong. Well, don't listen to Lydia Spencer. She's drunk. I turned my head to look at Gustavi Pansy. This was the most daring I had ever been since I was a child, probably because Gustavi Pansy was always uneasy in my heart, unwilling to do anything. I looked straight into Gustavi Pansy's eyes. Gustavi Pansy, are those fake? The summer wind carries a heat that cannot be dissolved, and I only feel a bitterness welling up in my mouth. You really didn't like me at all. In the last sentence, I seem to have put a lot of effort into it. Maybe in a crush, they all hope that, when they like each other, the other party also likes you, even if it's only a little bit. Originally, Gustavi Pansy was as brilliant as a galaxy, and I didn't dare to think about it. Maybe it's the alcohol. Maybe it's the secret love that has not been answered for so many years. I want to know. Even a little bit is better. It's just that Gustavi Pansy's answer is too slow. In the time Gustavi Pansy hadn't spoken, I already knew the answer. Well, I was a little drunk just now. Don't take it personally. I reached out to stop a taxi on the road, and as soon as my hand was stretched out, my arm was grabbed. Gustavi Pansy pulled me into his arms, and I slammed into Gustavi Pansy's chest. The familiar smell of wood, as it had been back then. Gustavi Pansy's voice was a little restrained. I like you. I've always liked you. I like you very much. What Lydia Spencer said is true. I used to be too cowardly. Now I don't want to be restrained anymore. Paula Lou, give me a chance. Let me chase you. Chasing you. 2 words. Sure me. It's really appealing. In that grand and silent crush, I was chasing Gustavi Pansy unilaterally. Okay, maybe it's because of the years I've missed. Or maybe it's because of my secret love for the first time in many years. Gustavi Pansy is really serious about delivering on his promises. Every day, he rode a motorcycle and waited for me, in front of my house. Gustavi Pansy's locomotive has a pink helmet on it. I put my arms around Gustavi Pansy's waist, and leaned on Gustavi Pansy's back. It was a picture of my dreams when I was a teenager, and now everything is so real. I staggered Gustavi Pansy's hands and couldn't help but pinch each other, feeling the pain that it was all real. Like a normal couple, we go to the cinema and watch brainless romances. I turn my head to look at the man sitting beside me. Even though the years have left a lot of marks on Gustavi Pansy, he is still a teenager in my heart. The movie showed the hero and heroine kissing, and the couples around me kissed excitedly, and I was holding the popcorn in my arms, so nervous that I didn't know what to do. Gustavi Pansy leaned over and I subconsciously closed my eyes. My nose was scratched, and I heard Gustavi Pansy's hearty laugh. Fool, I wouldn't have done those things until you were my girlfriend. Gustavi Pansy's voice was a little bewitching. I couldn't help but lean forward and kiss Gustavi Pansy on the lips. Gustavi Pansy, I want to be your girlfriend. I've thought about it since I was 18 years old. Now at 28, it doesn't seem too late. When the movie ended, Gustavi Pansy and I walked out of the cinema with our fingers clasped together. I asked about the ticket stub for the Gustavi Pansy movie ticket. Gustavi Pansy was strange, but he handed me the ticket stub. Gustavi Pansy sent me downstairs, and reluctantly said goodnight to each other. I went back to my room, opened the window, and waved goodbye to Gustavi Pansy. I opened a notebook hidden at the bottom of the drawer, and the paper of the notebook was already a little yellowed. I carefully pasted the ticket stub on. The first page of the notebook is a photo of Gustavi Pansy. Gustavi Pansy holds his guitar and plays a confession balloon on stage. I wanted to copy the leader's speech, and I copied all the videos of the party. I can't tell you when I fell in love with Gustavi Pansy. Maybe it was the first time I met, or maybe he sang a confession balloon on stage. The second page is Gustavi Pansy that I secretly photographed. I came out of the library and happened to meet a girl, who stopped Gustavi Pansy with a love letter in her hand. Filled with curiosity, I followed and watched as the girl read love letters to Gustavi Pansy as if they were reciting poems. And the timid but bold phrase, "Gustavi Pansy, I want to be your girlfriend." Gustavi Pansy stood across from him, and he couldn't help but laugh, showing his tiger teeth. His smile was always good-looking, like a April day on Earth, with a bit of Ruffianism. "Little girl, your feelings are not in place." I couldn't help but burst out laughing. The girl's eyes were red. "Who's hiding there?" I quickly retreated into the corner. The corners of Gustavi Pansy's mouth went up. "All right, next time." The next time God tried. My face hurt a little, but I was a little glad that the person who confessed was not me. Gustavi Pansy crouched around the corner. "Cats, come out." At that moment, my body tensed up. I didn't dare to speak, and my mind simulated over and over again what Gustavi Pansy would do when he found me. Fortunately, a cat jumped out and skillfully rubbed Gustavi Pansy's hand. I couldn't help but take out my phone and take a picture. I closed my notebook, and the thick notebook was full of Gustavi Pansy. I was with Gustavi Pansy for a month, and Gustavi Pansy said he was going to take me to his mother. I was nervous. This was the first time I had met my parents, let alone Gustavi Pansy's. Coral Sydney looked at me and was angry. "Paula Lou, I never expected you to be with Gustavi Pansy." "Gustavi Pansy, this pig is really a good cabbage, and I am such a good Paula Lou." I shook my head and explained for Gustavi Pansy. "Actually, I like Gustavi Pansy first." Coral Sydney raised his hand and flicked my head. I already knew. "Paula Lou, don't forget that we grew up together. Your careful mind can hide from anyone. You can't hide it from me. Love someone. You can't deceive people with your eyes." Coral Sydney took out the group photo of that year. It was a class group photo, but there was an extra person in the edge of the group photo. "That person is not Gustavi Pansy." "And who is it?" That year, a group photo was taken, and each class was lined up in order, and it was time for our class. As soon as I was standing, I heard someone call Gustavi Pansy. I subconsciously looked over, but I didn't expect that the photo was taken at that time. I didn't expect that my crush, which I thought I had hidden well, would be exposed here. Coral Sydney reached out and touched my head. "Paula Lou, congratulations." "I'm sorry." I also remember that Coral Sydney also liked Gustavi Pansy. "Paula Lou, I think you're really stupid. I just went with the crowd and liked Gustavi Pansy. You think I'm the heroine of that kind of novel. I like a person for more than 10 years. I looked at Coral Sydney, and seemed to understand that Coral Sydney and Gustavi Pansy's wish it that day was for me. "Coral Sydney, you're so nice." Coral Sydney pushed me out in disgust and handed me into Gustavi Pansy's hands. "Gustavi Pansy, my Paula Lou, will be handed over to you. If you dare to bully her, I will beat your parents to the death." Gustavi Pansy took my hand and said solemnly, "No." I looked at the red rose Gustavi Pansy was holding in her arms, and looked down at the gift box I was carrying. "Will I not do what I like? What if my aunt doesn't like me?" "Paula Lou, she's going to like you. She's going to love you." Gustavi Pansy's words dispelled all my worries. Gustavi Pansy didn't ride a motorcycle this time, but drove the car, and I sat in the co-pilot. Seeing the surrounding environment becoming more and more remote, I had a bad premonition in my heart, until I saw the word cemetery. I turned my head to look at Gustavi Pansy, and saw that Gustavi Pansy was wearing black, and I was wearing a red dress. "Gustavi Pansy, my clothes." Gustavi Pansy reached out and put his arm around my head, and kissed me on the center of my brow. "Don't worry, Mommy likes red. She likes you more." I was led by Gustavi Pansy to a tomb, and when I looked at the pictures on the tomb, my eyes fell on the date, 6 years ago, on June the 10th, the day of the exam. I seemed to know why Gustavi Pansy didn't take it. Gustavi Pansy knelt down in front of the tombstone and solemnly introduced me to Mrs. Pansy. "Mom, this is Paula Lou. I told you about Paula Lou. I'm finally with her." "Mom, don't worry, I won't let down Paula Lou." Gustavi Pansy's words, every sentence was unexpected to me, and I looked at Gustavi Pansy with wide eyes. Gustavi Pansy nodded at me, took my hand, and led me to Mrs. Pansy. My voice trembled uncontrollably. "Auntie, you..." "Hello." I'm Paula Lu." The red roses were placed in front of Mrs. Pansy's grave, which was very different from the plain white flowers around her, and I looked at the photo of Mrs. Pansy and felt slightly fascinated. I seemed to have seen Mrs. Pansy somewhere, and after a few seconds I shook Gustavi Pansy's hand excitedly. "Auntie is my kindergarten teacher. As for why I remember this teacher, it is because Mrs. Pansy is really beautiful. I have liked beautiful teachers since I was a child, and Mrs. Pansy also likes me very much." Gustavi Pansy shook my hand back. It turned out that my aunt had already chosen her future daughter-in-law at a very early age. Gustavi Pansy pulled a yellowed piece of paper out of her bag and handed it to me. "Paula Lu, here's a letter from my mom." I was a little surprised, and it wasn't until I saw Paula Lu's 3 words on the envelope that I was sure that the letter was really for me. Gustavi Pansy didn't stay here and left the place to me. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the dated stationery inside. "Paula Lu, hello, Auntie. I'm sorry that I couldn't witness your happy moment with Gustavi Pansy, and couldn't see you walk into the wedding hall with my own eyes. Paula Lu, in fact, my aunt has known you for a long time. You were the best girl in kindergarten at that time, and she liked to pester me, and I wanted to order you and Gustavi Pansy a baby kiss back then. Unexpectedly, when Gustavi Pansy was 18 years old, I accidentally saw the photos collected by Gustavi Pansy, and my aunt recognized you at a glance. When Gustavi Pansy was 20 years old, my aunt was already in the advanced stage and relied on medicine to continue her life. It was also at that time that Gustavi Pansy told me that he had a girl he liked, and that person was you, and my aunt thought that there was such a fate in this world, and Gustavi Pansy's child, sensitive and slow to heat, but he was a man who accepted death, and if he liked you, he really liked you. Paula Lu, Auntie wishes you all the best in growing old together, and everlasting together, and in peace." Tears fell uncontrollably on the letterhead, and hands trembled uncontrollably. It turned out that Gustavi Pansy had liked me so early. It turned out that I was really not alone in that grand crush. With red eyes, I ran towards Gustavi Pansy, jumped directly into Gustavi Pansy's arms. "Gustavi Pansy, I like you so much." Gustavi Pansy hugged my waist and landed her head on my shoulders, different from her usual lazy style, with a bit of sincerity. "Paula Lu, I like you so much. I like you so much." A month later, Lydia Spencer invited me to her birthday party, and Gustavi Pansy might have been late because of something at the bar. I didn't know until now that the bar was opened by Gustavi Pansy, carrying a gift for Lydia Spencer. I knocked on the door of the box. Lydia Spencer was dressed in a pale blue cheongsam, which was very attractive. Standing next to him was a somewhat smart man in a suit, probably Rachel Hicks. Lydia Spencer warmly took my wrist. "Sister-in-law." Rachel Hicks looked at me as well, and I could tell from his eyes that he knew me. "Sister-in-law?" The people around him asked in surprise when they heard Rachel Hicks' name. Rachel Hicks scratched her head and pointed at me. "This is Gustavi Pansy's white moonlight sweetheart." Everyone immediately showed expressions of understanding. During the dinner, a hot girl stared at me and said excitedly, "Lydia Spencer was a shield back then. It's you." "Hello, I'm one of Gustavi Pansy's suitors." The brother next to him also coaxed. "Sister-in-law is good." No wonder Gustavi Pansy doesn't dare to say it. Sister-in-law's appearance. It's a matter of minutes to kill Sister Lydia Spencer in seconds. Rachel Hicks shook her fist, and was full of warning. "My daughter-in-law is the most beautiful in the world." Lydia Spencer didn't care, and took my arm, afraid that I would be embarrassed. "If you make fun of my sister-in-law again, you won't be afraid that my brother will come and cut you." Sure enough, the crowd stopped talking, and Lydia Spencer led me to her seat. Every now and then, I look at my phone and ask when Gustavi Pansy will arrive. Lydia Spencer reached out and pulled my phone out. "Sister-in-law, let's play games." I was lucky and didn't lose in the first few rounds. Rachel Hicks helped Lydia Spencer drink a lot and started talking nonsense. "Sister-in-law, I'll tell you, Gustavi Pansy is a sullen master, and I don't think I know what the name of his bar means." "Sister-in-law, you shouldn't have seen it. The tattoo on Gustavi Pansy's body. A string of Sanskrit numbers. At first I thought it was the birthday of a girl that Gustavi Pansy liked. But once Gustavi Pansy got drunk and confessed to himself." "What birthday?" It's the day we meet you for the first time. Gustavi Panzi is such a proud person. He was really humbled to the dust for that punishment. Gustavi Panzi is really a madman. Gustavi Panzi is really not a thing. Borrowing my Lydia Spencer as a shield, causing me to be with Lydia Spencer for so long too. With him, the door opened, and a wary look fell on Rachel Hicks. I subconsciously looked at the figure who opened the door. Gustavi Panzi was wearing a black short-sleeved shirt. The top few buttons were unbuttoned, revealing a delicate collarbone and looming Sanskrit text. Gustavi Panzi took the glass from my hand. Sorry, I'm late. Punish myself with 3 glasses. Gustavi Panzi's line is noticeable, especially when drinking. The Adam's apple is surging up and down, and a little wine stain is running down her cheeks. Indescribably sexy. I always knew that Gustavi Panzi was born well, and even at the age of 28, Gustavi Panzi was still my sweetheart. Gustavi Panzi sat down next to me after 3 glasses of wine and leaned over to me, her voice a little hoarse after she had just finished drinking. Paula Lou, just ask me if there's anything you want to know. Probably because I was absent-minded, I lost the next one. Lydia Spencer pondered for a few seconds and asked me, did my sister-in-law like Gustavi Panzi when she was in college? Gustavi Panzi took my glass and poured it full. I've drunk this one. I took Gustavi Panzi's raised hand, and looked firmly into Gustavi Panzi's eyes. Yes, I could feel Gustavi Panzi's body tremble, and the dilation of pupils visible to the naked eye. Gustavi Panzi took my hand directly and took me into his arms. Paula Lou, thank you for liking me. The noise around them was louder. Kiss one, kiss one. Gustavi Panzi looked at me and said inquiringly, is that okay? It seemed like as soon as I shook my head, he would take me away. I nodded. Maybe Gustavi Panzi and I were both children in a relationship. Then I wish we all the best in our relationship. The end.